I want to tell you my author story. So when I was a young man, a teenager, I set a goal for myself. I said, one day I'm going to be a published writer. So I started writing my very first book. And really, I thought this book was going to make me famous. I've actually made a video on this book. It was a book kind of like a Lord of the Rings. It was a high fantasy series that was going to be just really epic, have lots of sword fighting, lots of magic, and I was really proud of it. I actually worked on this book for about 9 years. 9 years of world building, and I finally wrote it, and it was this great big book. This was the book. It's huge, right? Very big. But I realized something about the book. I'd always recognized that there was something off about the book. Like, imagine if you had been playing the piano for several years of your life, you recorded it, and then you listened to a master. You listened to somebody who was a professional piano player. Suddenly your work probably wouldn't sound as good. And that's kind of what I noticed. Whenever I opened up a book by famous authors, I realized mine just wasn't up to snuff. I also recognized that I was too emotionally attached to the project. And once I was about to send it out to literary agents, I couldn't deal with the concept of the book failing. Emotionally, I couldn't deal with the idea that somebody was not going to like the book. So I put the book away. And I came to a conclusion, which was interesting, because that book and the sequels to it were going to be the only books I was ever going to be writing. I wanted to be known for those books. And I was ended up putting them away. So I had to ask myself, do I want to keep writing? So I made a decision and I started writing another book. And I kind of fell in love with writing after it. This was my second book, a lot smaller. This book was actually a middle grade book meant for younger readers, like readers of the first Percy Jackson or Harry Potter books. And I realized something as I was writing the book. I was a better writer. I'd learned so much from my first book, and I could now apply it to this next book. And it was simpler, and it was fun, and it had lots of magic and intrigue, and it was like this boy who was going on a race to the end of the rainbow with a partner leprechaun, and there was a competition against some evil gnomes. It was pretty fun. This was actually the first book that I sent out to literary agents, and I still remember the day I sent it out. I was so nervous after I sent him out that my face was flushed red, like heat was splotching up my neck. And like I went out to get lunch and I got a cheeseburger, and by the time I came back home with the cheeseburger to eat it, I'd already received rejection from an agent. Now, I'd heard before that a lot of writers actually takes them about a decade before they actually get a book that's published. And I remember I turned to my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I said, do you think this is really going to take 10 years? And then she looks at me and she goes, nah, I don't think so. This book's really good. I thought it was good too. So we kept sending it out. I sent it out to a lot of agents. I got a lot of rejections, but a couple people were actually interested. And they ultimately did pass on the book, but it was a huge milestone for me because it was my first book that I officially sent out to literary agents, and I actually got a few nibbles. And just getting a full request is like a pretty good sign. So I decided, what am I going to do next? I'm going to write another book. Now, my third book, as you can see, I got a little thicker, actually is when my writing just like skyrocketed. I was really starting to heat up as a writer, and I was taking what I had learned from my first book, which was like this really big action-packed fantasy, and then the fun of my second book, and I kind of mixed it together. And so I wrote a middle grade fantasy set in a fantasy world with a young boy who was raised by goblins. And I had so much fun with this book. Now, after I finished writing this book, I actually sent it out to agents, and I was getting quite a bit of nibbles for it, especially in like my first 20 or 30 queries that I sent out. I had like 4 or 5 fulls, and so I was pretty excited that somebody was going to offer me. But then I got some crucial feedback, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with the feedback. And I realized that it was a crucial problem that was wrong with the book, and I didn't know how to fix it. So what did I do? I put the book away for a little bit, and then I wrote my fourth book. My fourth book was also another middle grade fantasy. This time it was called The Unspeakable Words, and it starred a young boy who was actually serving 3 life sentences in a fairy tale prison. The reason why is because when he got upset with his sister, he said, I do not believe in fairies, and he said it 3 times. And connecting with Peter Pan, the whole, if you say, I do not believe in fairies, it actually can kill a fairy, he ends up accidentally murdering a family of fairies. And so he is now stuck in this prison with all of the worst fairy tale creatures. I described it kind of as like a Shawshank Redemption meets Shrek. It was a really weird mix, but I had a lot of fun with it. Eventually, at one point, I actually conferenced with an agent about this. I attended their webinar, and I got to conference with them and like ask them a couple questions about my book. And essentially, they kind of liked the concept, but they said that there was something fundamentally wrong with it, and they thought that it wouldn't sell. And I was still a relatively young writer at the time, and I kind of took their words to heart. Maybe I should have fought harder and maybe just ignored it, but I kind of trusted this person. They were a very successful agent. And so what did I do? Well, I put The Unspeakable Words away. And then I went back to my third book. Now, my third book is also my fifth book. And what I mean by that is I actually rewrote this book. This is the version for my third book. But my fifth version, I didn't have printed out. That one was so much stronger than it was as the third book. And I sent this out to literary agents, and I started getting nibbles again, and people were interested again. Interestingly, with the book, when I moved to my 5th book, something really happened. I made a realization about my writing instincts. And now I was just telling a story, and I wasn't thinking about theme or character arcs or plot lines. I was just writing a story, and it was all coming together really seamlessly. And it really reflected in the writing. At one point, I had a literary agent who was so interested in my book that they actually offered me what's called a revise and a resubmit, an R&R. These are really coveted things. Agents don't send these out very often. When they do, it means they're very, very close to offering you, to offer to represent you, but they have some reservations about something and they want to see if you can revise. And so I took her revisions, I looked at them, and I spent 3 months revising the book. And I was so proud of what I accomplished because I worked so hard on it. And I sent them back to her thinking, okay, she's going to offer me, we're going to be going out with the Landwalker of Rootfrost. I'm going to be a published writer. I had the stars in my eyes, you know. Well, about a week later, after she confirmed receipt of my revision, she sent me an email. And she said that she was leaving that agency. She was no longer going to be at that agency. And instead, she was going to forward my book over to another agent at her agency. This was really disheartening, but I knew what I had created. I felt very confident in the work that I had created. So we sent it off to that other agent. About 2 weeks later, the other agent comes back to me. Clearly has only read about 3 or 4 pages of the book and turned it down for completely different reasons. Didn't get far enough to see where my revisions were from the prior agent, gave me new feedback that I had never heard before, and just passed on the project. It was legitimately one of the worst days of my life. I was so frustrated. And after that, I gave up on the book. I was like, I'm done. I don't have the emotional bandwidth for this. And as I was driving home, I was so furious. And I didn't know what I was going to do. But writing has always been sort of a cathartic thing for me. So I sat down and I started writing. And this is what became my 6th book. A character named Conrad of Elise. He came fully formed in my head. And he was this boy who had everything stolen away from him. He was this former highborn who had lost his status and everything due to his treacherous uncle. And he wanted to win it all back. He was hell-bent on getting everything back. And this book just flowed out of me. This world in the sky, sky ships, giant sky serpents called Gorgantons, dueling canes, and lots of raw anger and emotion. I had taken everything I had learned over all of my other books and applied it to this book, and something felt different about this book. And this was the book that actually got me an agent. An agent emailed me. She said she wanted to talk. She loved my book. She ended up offering me. And then afterward, we did revisions together. We went for revisions. The title went from Downfall to become Sky's End. And then we went out on submission with the book. And submission is going out to publishers. And the second editor on our initial list of submissions emailed back a few months later. And in his email, he basically asked, is this book still available? And my agent emailed me and we talked about it, and she said, hey, this is a really good sign, but don't get too excited. I've seen lots of books reach this stage and it doesn't go any further. So just assume the worst, but hope for the best. Well, about 90 minutes after that, we get another email. And the editor has now offered on the book. My book was getting published. Sky's End is getting published. And it was this amazing, crazy feeling because I was in the middle of teaching my 7th period class and I was having them work in groups on something. And so I saw the email on my phone and then I stopped the class. The whole class thought I was going to pass out. And then I made the announcement that I was going to be a published writer, and my students all started cheering and they were all laughing and clapping and they were all so excited, probably just as excited as I was. You know, when I got home, my wife greeted me at the door. She hugged me. We laughed. We cried. I told my family. I told my friends. It was just this really surreal moment. And then I remember after everything had calmed down and after dinner, I went outside and I sat outside by my little koi pond and the breeze was blowing in my face and it was just this really serene, quiet moment. And I thought, I did it. My book, Sky's End, is coming out in spring 2024 from Peachtree Teen, and I cannot wait for people to read it. I hope you will read it. I'm really confident that a lot of people are really going to like this book. Thank you so much for hearing my journey today. And please follow me for more. I talk about writing on my TikToks and my YouTube. I give writing tips, and I also am going to be talking about my book and my journey. I hope my journey is inspiring to you. I know that getting published is really difficult. I was there. I experienced it. I was rejected hundreds of times, and I had to write lots of books before I finally reached it. Keep trying for your goals. You know, it's not going to be easy, but it's possible.